Alrighty. So thank you very much, Derek. That was an awesome primer into Kubernetes. As you can tell, Kubernetes is a really dense subject. There's a lot to it. I wanted to explain a little bit about how this demo is going to go. It's going to be different than our traditional 101s, especially the getting started, where we typically go through the process of setting up the project, setting up the targets, and setting up the environments as well. I've already gone ahead and created the project environments as well as some project variables, so we don't have to waste time typing all of those in. I wanted to talk briefly about a Kubernetes target in Octopus Deploy. The traditional sense of an Octopus Deploy target is a tentacle that's installed on like a virtual machine or a physical machine somewhere that you deploy to. With Kubernetes, you don't install the tentacle on anything. In fact, you actually just interact with the Kubernetes API. So essentially, you're only providing instructions. So for this demonstration, I did create a Kubernetes target in AKS for us already, and I did that with a runbook that I'll just briefly walk you through. So I called it create K8 cluster. And the first thing that it does is it creates a resource group, and I do that mostly to keep things nice and tidy for all the resources created for this demonstration, so that when I go to delete the resources, I just delete the resource group and it takes care of everything for me. I don't have any leftover components that I might accidentally be paying for. Then I get the Kubernetes version. The Kubernetes version can vary by region. So I wrote a little script to go out and query the supported versions of Kubernetes in the region that I'm in, grab the highest version, and then stuff that into an Octopus output variable. The next step is to use an ARM template. Now, Azure has done a fantastic job in that you could go to the portal, you could start to design the resource or resources that you want, and then before actually creating them, you have the ability to download the ARM template. So you can do this automatically using automation, and that's what I've done. I've just put in a couple of variables, and here's that Kubernetes output variable that I showed you. And we can touch on the ARM template later. I was going to try to quickly go through this. Lastly, we have a step template that one of our colleagues created to register the cluster to the instance, and that was because we've done a lot of these and we kept copying and pasting code. So they had the forethought to put that into a step template just to make it easier. All right. So now that we've shown you, one thing I wanted to mention, on our samples instance, which is where I'm at right now, we do have a ton of different runbook examples that you can see how to use them. So I'd recommend going to check that out as well. So let's define our process. So OctoPetShop, as we explained before, consists of the four major components, which is the web front end, the product service, the shopping cart service, and the database project that uses DBUp, which will create the database if it doesn't exist and perform our migrations for us. Now, we'll also need a database server to run this against. So as part of this demonstration, I've included the deployment of a SQL Server container. So we're going to click on Add Step. And right away, you'll notice that Kubernetes itself has an entire category devoted to it. And when you click in here, you can see that we have 8 built-in step templates, as well as a few community step templates that people have created to go along with it. For this demonstration, we are going to be using mostly this deploy to Kubernetes containers step. So I'm going to click on Add here and call Deploy SQL Server. And as I scroll, you'll be able to see all the different options that are available for a deployment for Kubernetes. I've already created a variable for the deployment name, so I'll go ahead and select that now. For the most part, I'm going to leave a lot of this as default because this is just a demonstration. I want to show you exactly what could be done. So I'm just going to have one. I don't need multiple SQL servers at this point. Normally, when you create a database server, you would create a persistent volume to go along with it. For this demonstration, we're not really going to worry about persisting data if the container is destroyed, so we're not going to create a persistent volume or a persistent volume claim. But I am going to go ahead and select the container, give this a name. And for this container, I'm going to be pulling from Docker Hub. So I'm going to search for the image I want to use. And here it is, the SQL Server for Linux. I need to expose a container port so that we can use it. So we'll call it SQL Server port. And this is the standard one of 1433. There are 2 environment variables that are required for this container to actually run. So let's scroll down to the environment variable section. And again, you can see that there's just a ton of different options you can choose just in the container section alone. So here we are, environment variables. So I'm going to click on Add Environment Variable. The first one is accept EULA. And we're going to hard code that to yes, because why wouldn't you accept EULA? And the next one is the SA password. And I've stuffed that into a variable so that I don't mistype it. Need a little octostash in front of that. Scroll down through the rest of this just so you can see what's available. We are essentially done with this container, but just wanted to show you the sheer amount of options that are available for the container alone. Okay. Along with this container, we do need a cluster IP service to go along with it so that other pods can talk to it. So we're going to scroll down to the service section of this form. And we're going to give our cluster IP service a name. Now this name is pretty important so that, because this ends up being the DNS name so that other pods can find it by name rather than having to know its actual IP address. And since we exposed the container port, we need to expose the service port as well. So we'll go ahead and do that now. And use the same port of 1433. Okay. It's going to scroll down the one time so you can see that all of the other different options that are available in this form. There's just a ton. Okay. I'm going to add our next step. This is going to be our web front end. So again, I'll choose Kubernetes and the deploy Kubernetes containers. Call that deploy web. Oh, I think I forgot to choose this on our previous step. So let me go back and make sure I did that. I did not. So there we go. That's required. All right. We'll continue here. We'll go down to the deployment section, and I'm going to give this deployment a name. And one thing that's going to be slightly different than all of the other ones that we're going to do is I'm actually going to add a label to this, and I'll explain why this is required later. I'm going to give it a name of components and a value of web. We'll scroll down to the container section here. And this container is going to be pulled from our private repo of Nexus. Let's give it a name here. So use our Nexus container feed here. And select our web container. Now this container needs to expose 2 different ports. It's running the ASP.NET Core web application, which is running the Kestrel server, which has a default port of 5,000. So we're going to set that to 5,000. And this application automatically redirects to HTTPS. So we need to expose that port as well. And that one's on 5,001. The web front end does need to know the URLs to the two services that we're going to be adding in a minute. So we need to add a couple of environment variables for this. So click on Add Environment Variable. Paste these guys in here. So there's the product service. And then we also need the shopping cart service as well. Okay, now that we've added those environment variables, we are done with this container. And this particular deployment doesn't need anything else, so we can go ahead and click on adding our next step. And now we're going to add the product service. So again, we'll choose Kubernetes and deploy Kubernetes containers. So this will be the product service. Choose our same role. Give this deployment a name. And now we're going to add the container. So the rest of these are going to exist on our Docker feed, so we're going to choose that for all of them. This has one port it needs to expose, which is an HTTP port, and it's configured to run on 5011. This container also needs the database connection string, so we need to add that as an environment variable. So let's scroll down to the environment variable section. Add the name and its variable that I've defined inside of our project variables. Okay, we are done with the container. This one does need a cluster IP service, so it can be found. So let's scroll down to the service section. And we're going to give our service a name. And expose that same port that we did for the container. Okay, we are done with the product service, so let's move on to the shopping cart service. Following the same steps. Choose the same role. And we're going to give this deployment a name as well. And this, I'm going to go down to the container section and add the container. Choose our Nexus feed, search for our container. And shopping cart service. This does need to expose one port. And this runs on 5012. And just like the other service, it needs to be able to connect to the database, so we need to define one environment variable for that. I think I still have the value in my clipboard there. Okay, so we're done with the container. Just like the other service, we do need to have a cluster IP service so that it can be talked to. So let's scroll down to the service section. Give this service a name. And then also expose the same port we did. So that's the HTTP ports. All right. So far, we've created our SQL Server, our web front end, and our two services. The next part that we needed to add was the ability to do our database migrations. This is a slightly different type of thing in Kubernetes in that it's a console applications that's designed to run, then stop. Usually Kubernetes containers or Docker containers in general are supposed to keep running. So this is slightly different. So we need to add a different step template. So we're going to click Add Step. And I did want to point out that I actually haven't had to save in any of these steps that I've added. This is a relatively new feature in Octopus Deploy that it saves. You can do a save all at once versus having to do a save per step. In older versions, it was a save per step. So that was something that could be quite cumbersome at times, especially if you have large deployments. So let's click on Kubernetes, and we're going to choose Deploy Raw Kubernetes YAML. Okay, call that DB up. And within this step template, you have two different ways that you can supply the YAML. You can actually have it within the step itself or defined inside of a package. We're going to add this to the step itself. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in the YAML that's required for this. As you can see, it's a kind of job, and that is designed to run, then stop, and Kubernetes knows that. We've defined where to find it from our Nexus feed, as well as given it the connection string that's required. So we are done with this. Now, the one thing we haven't done is given the ability for the internet to talk to our web front end. Now, there are two ways that you could do this. You could do this with an ingress controller or a load balancer. For this demonstration, we are going to use a load balancer. So I'm going to click on Add Step again, Kubernetes. And since I'm not deploying a container, I don't need to use this, but I can use this Deploy Kubernetes service resource. So if I click on Add here, deploy load balancer, and choose our same role. I didn't give this one a variable, so we'll just call this web load balancer. And I'm going to choose the load balancer type. For the cluster IP and the load balancer IP, especially when it's an external, Azure is going to do this for us, so we don't need to specify what that IP address is, so we can just leave that alone. But we do need to add a couple of service ports, so I'm going to have the load balancer listen on port 80, but route to 5,000. And if you recall earlier how I mentioned the application is automatically going to redirect to HTTPS, so I need to add that port as well. And that was on 5001, and we're just going to leave it at 5001. All right, our deployment, oh, forgot one thing. We do need to tell the load balancer what pod to connect to. So that's where that label came in, where I added that to the web front end. So we're going to use a selector label. So we're going to add this, and we're going to give it the same name and value so that it knows what to attach to. Okay. Our entire process is complete. So now we can kick this thing off and let it rip. We're going to create a release here. And deploy to development. So that was actually relatively simple. What did you think, Derek?
Well, that was, considering how complex Kubernetes is to learn, I thought that was really great. Because one of the things that gets me about Kubernetes is it has so many layers. It's a bit of a layer cake, Sean, I think. And I think what you have just shown there is really good in that it kind of really helps cut through that cake of, obviously the layer cake and get there much quicker.
Yeah, I like your play on words there, Derek. Layers.
But yeah, it does definitely seem to make Kubernetes much more much simpler. Because that's the thing is it's great. You know, Kubernetes is a fantastic platform, but it is quite. I think you said earlier on, it's quite dense. You know, and it is. To be honest, it's funny though because I don't think it's massively different when you get. You know, you still need a virtual machine, etc., to run this on. It's just obviously the abstraction of the operating system is at the node level.
Yeah, and when you talk about virtual machines and whatnot, let's go take a look at what was actually created for us in the Azure portal. So as I explained before, I create a resource group for this, and it's aptly named Webinar K8 Octopus. If I click into this, I only see one resource. I see a Kubernetes service, and that's it. And if you're familiar with Kubernetes, you know that there's a bunch of other things that run Kubernetes, the different VMs and whatnot. So when I was looking at this, I was wondering where all those things actually went. And that's when I noticed that there was this other resource group that I didn't create. And when I click into this, I find all those other things that Azure just creates for you. And that's one of the really cool things about that managed service is that you don't have to know all that stuff in the background. It's going to create it for you. And it just makes it simple.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because you still have that public IP address, you still have the virtual machine, you still have that root table, which is really great. Because that's the things that, you know, you still need a load balancer for your Kubernetes pod to run.
That's right. Let's go check on our deployment here. Looks like it's got the SQL servers done. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the interface of Kubernetes here. So if we click on this, we can see this workloads section here. And we can see that our SQL Server deployment has been complete and it is up and running. And currently it's working on the next one.
Yeah. I really like that. I have to say this. You know, obviously this is things that I've played with Kubernetes in the past, and obviously as part of our webinar, I had to go do a bunch of learning, and it's great to kind of see how Octopus really kind of takes you through and makes it much simpler. And the thing is, as well, is like obviously you can provision this. Like you've done the provisioning of the infrastructure using ARM, which is Azure Resource Manager templates using an Octopus Runbook as well. So not only can you spin up deploy the application, but you're also spinning up the actual infrastructure for it as well. And it's super fast because I think we've done this in the past, and you're roughly talking about 6 minutes to deploy the infrastructure, and then also about another 6 minutes to deploy the application. So you look at 12 minutes to actually take you through to deploy the infrastructure, then the application. And it's not just a straightforward application either. What you can, with that, you're also doing you're doing that SQL database, you're doing the web front end, you've got the product service, you've then got the shopping cart, and then lastly, the database as well. So, it's not just a web app and a database, it's fairly complex.
Yeah. And I mean, if you really want to, if you're new to Kubernetes, I would definitely recommend taking courses on like Udemy or Pluralsight. I personally took the one on Udemy, and it definitely demystified how all of this works. Containers, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the subject, but at least I have a much better understanding of how it works and how it fits together. Yeah,
I think there's lots of really great I think there's a lot of really great resources out there like that. Like you said about Pluralsight, there's Skylines Academy. I mean, there's so many great and free resources as well. Like for instance, I've done a lot on Microsoft Learn as well. So if you are in that Azure side of things, then you can use Microsoft Learn for free. It'll teach you a lot of the basic concepts, Docker, containers, all the way through to Azure container registries as well. So there's lots of really great resources out there for free and paid for as well. You've done some on AWS as well, haven't you?
I've done some things on AWS. I've found that the permissions on AWS are a bit trickier to work with and getting something to work well. So I've mostly used Azure or a local instance for my Kubernetes playing around.
Yeah, because with Azure, this is all happening with a service principle, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I have to say, because obviously you can get very granular with that. I have to say, it does tend to make things pretty straightforward.
It looks like it's getting pretty close to being done. So if we pop back over to Azure and do a refresh on our services, we can see all the different workloads that were being deployed. The one thing that you're not going to see in this specific interface is that DBF job. That's mostly because it's not a workload in the traditional sense. It's just a job, and this is exposing deployments. Let's pop back over here. See. Oh, we have a failure. The demo gods were not kind to me today. Let me see if I can figure out what happened here. Did I forget to? I forgot to add the role.
That'll do it. That'll do it. We've all been there before.
So we are going to create a new release. And we're not going to deploy the entire thing. We just need to deploy these last two steps.
Yeah, it's really good. I like that about Octopus is you don't have to deploy everything all the time. So there's good management there. But obviously one of the things you can't, obviously with Sean showing this, you can't redeploy version 0.01 again because unfortunately it snapshots it. So that's just something to factor in when you're, sometimes you get it. Sometimes you actually get like a timeout or a problem with the API as well. So,
yeah. Unfortunately. But the one thing that you can do is if you make changes to variables, you do have the ability to update the variables on an existing snapshot, and you can redeploy that one if that was all that was done.
There we go. So we've just got the load balancer to go. I remember when this used to take 3 months, Sean, and it's and you're doing it in 12 minutes.
Yep. Maybe 13 minutes with my Staffu.
Yeah.
So if we click on our services, we can see all the different services that were deployed. We can see that these here, as I said, are actually going to be the DNS entry names that are going to be used when the different components that talk to each other run. So let's see if this is all ready to go. Oh, I hate staring at loading. So did you learn anything new here, Derek?
I think, yeah, definitely. I think I've probably learned more, obviously, over the time that we've spent together both doing it. But I think there's a lot of really great stuff here. I think this will really help out, and I really like in the Azure portal where it shows you the port mapping. So you've got like port 80 to obviously your local ports, and obviously you're doing NAT in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's give this one more try before here we go. We can see that it's already redirected us to port 5001. It is using a self-signed certificate, so this is normal. This is just for demonstration purposes. And here we go. We have Octopus deployed in Kubernetes.
Awesome. That's really great. Thank you very much, Sean, for that. That was and obviously one of the things I just want to point out is we'll send over all these resources that Sean has been using today. So we'll actually, you can log on and download the containers for each of those and then use this video to actually run through and do it yourself in Octopus. Okay, so it's Q&A time. Let's say we've got oh, this one's a really good one. Here goes. There's quite a bit to it, Sean. Any thoughts on what a developer's individual setup should look like? E.g., would you recommend using Kubernetes locally? If so, how to avoid duplicating all the Octopus process steps you just manually created? Seems what would be useful is the underlying YAML for those Octopus deploy steps to be stored in Git, along with the source code, and also used by developers locally. There's quite a bit to that one.
There is quite a bit to that one. And with, I see your point. I'm going to actually pop back over to my screen real quick and show you something that I didn't show you during. So if we go back to process here, when using this container step, we do have the ability to go and see the YAML that was created for each of these different sections. So this was the deployment section. And also we do have the service section. We can do the same thing here. We can see how that was created. So if you did use this form and you instead wanted to use the YAML, you could just copy and paste those. And instead of using this step template, you could use that deploy YAML step template, have all of those YAML files in a package and do it that way and say, use this file in a package.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can you source control this as well?
Can you config as code is coming. It's on our roadmap. It's up the top of the hill, so not quite yet. But you could source control if you just had just the YAML and decided to use the YAML approach. You could, yes.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And obviously, you can use Minikube locally on your development workstation, but along with that as well, you can also use cloud providers as well. Like quite often what I see, Sean, is when people are developing on Kubernetes, you'll likely still want something in AKS that you can spin up each day, deploy your source code to, test it. But Minikube is also something that you can install locally using Homebrew if you're on a Mac or a Linux box, and then also with you can also install it via Chocolatey as well.
Yeah, there's also Docker for desktop that can run Kubernetes.
Yeah.
That also helps with local development.
Yeah, that's always a good question because it's you with the development side of things, you kind of want it to be as close to production as you possibly can.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I think we've answered that one. That was really good. Got another one in the demo. When deploying version 0.2, will the version 0.1 containers be removed? If so, does that happen on a step-by-step basis in the Octopus process? If you wanted to deploy all version 0.2 components and then stop health check and have rollback option before moving to the new version. So yeah, that's quite a question. Obviously, I think with that, it doesn't automatically remove any containers. It would only redeploy the new version of the containers. Would that be correct?
With the 0.2, when I deselected all of those other steps, it didn't run any of those other ones. So depending on the options that you chose, you could have the rolling deployment type or the recreate option on those within this step template. So it didn't do anything with them at all. It focused on the 2 steps that I had remaining.
Awesome. We have another one here. Are you aware of any methods of adding custom options within the container section within the deployment template?
Custom options. That's a good question. Let's see here. Let's go down to, oh, I missed it. Where am I? Containers. I don't believe I saw one in this step templates.
That's one thing is there's so many options. It's very customizable. I started jumping into taints and tolerance and it started actually it was very complex, but it's really cool.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm not seeing anything for custom options other than maybe overriding the command on the container if it has that ability.
Yeah, also you can reach out to advice@octopus.com if you to be a little bit more specific and see if we can help you there. Is there any demo documentation available on blue-green Kubernetes deployments? Because that's something that we do by default, isn't it, Sean?
It is. And does Matt Casperson have one of those blog posts out? I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah,
I think
Matt's got so much documentation out there. So what I do there is check out octopus.com/docs. Again, if you have a look around, there's loads of great information. Obviously, with Kubernetes, you can have a rolling upgrade. You can have blue-green as well. What are the other options as well, Sean?
These are the options that are available. It's recreate, rolling, or blue-green. So,
yeah. So to ties back into some of the previous question as well, you can also, if you selected recreate deployments with that new release, then that would have then went and just done the full. But obviously, as you deselected it, you didn't want to use that option. So that makes sense.
yeah.
So yeah. Okay. So one question is, can you use GCP with Octopus for deployments?
Yes, we do have on samples. If I pop over to the Kubernetes, this deployment orchestration run down here uses all GCP to deploy Octopus Shop.
Yeah, so you can go to samples.octopus.app and actually log in as guest and see all of this going live. You won't be able to do the deployments, but you'll be able to see all the scripts, etc. So obviously check that out. Can you use Helm with Octopus?
You can use Helm. Pop back over to the webinar here, so I don't mess with anything over there. And process in the Kubernetes section, there is at least one Helm that you can use, and I know it can be used. I haven't used it personally, but I do know that other customers have used it.
Yeah, awesome. Another one as well is, does it work with OpenShift and Rancher?
It does. I've recently done 2 blog posts on both subjects that you can use Octopus Deploy with both Rancher and OpenShift.
Awesome. Right, I think that's all the questions. So let's wrap this up. Okay, so thank everybody for attending today's webinar. I hope you learned something. Just one of the things to be aware of, we do have some test drive virtual machines. So if you go to octopus.com/test drive, there are virtual machines that you can download and just get running straight away. One of the things just to be aware of is on the 2nd of September, we've got another webinar on Octopus 101, server provisioning in AWS with CloudFormation and Runbook automation by Adam Close and Michael Levan. Then on the 16th of September, I'll be back with Raygun.io talking about empowering your development team with real user monitoring and automated deployments. We do have a short feedback survey that will open at the end of today's webinar. We would love it if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete that. It really helps us plan future webinars as well. Sean, I thought your demo was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And everyone else, have a great day, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.